Okay, you're live, Yvette.
All right. Hello, everyone. Um, my name is Yvette Joseph. I am a member of the Colville Confederated Tribes. I live in Spokane, Washington, and I am by profession a social worker and work as a private consultant. It's my honor to join you here at the Native Wellness Institute's Power Hour, and I'm really happy to talk about the exciting news that we all received on Saturday that Joe Biden has been elected as the President of the United States. He's the President-elect until his inauguration in January. And I'm also very pleased to announce that Kamala Harris is the first woman who will be serving as Vice President of the United States. And the really wonderful thing about Kamala is that she is a Black American with Indian affiliation from India. Her mother is from India. So we have a biracial woman who will be assuming the position of Vice President of the United States. So I'm just really excited about that. There were a lot of really important aspects of that that are so important. But, the real issues revolved around the pandemic and the necessity of trying to bring control to the pandemic and hopefully eradication. And so, the problem with Donald Trump is that he didn't really have a plan. He didn't really embrace the issues of science with respect to developing a comprehensive plan. And you have to really consider science when you're in the position in the White House to determine the proper strategy for dealing with, a medical condition and with the virus and all of the things that happen, to save and sustain lives. And so for me personally, I'm just really happy. I've been quarantined in my house, been staying away from family for the most part since mid-March. My job with Eastern Washington University had to be suspended because my position was a temporary position as a research associate. And the really exciting thing about my work for Eastern is helping to create the Lucy Covington Initiative, an archive of Lucy Covington, who was our former tribal council member from the Colville tribe, who vigorously fought the termination of our tribal community. And she did that by working with members of Congress. And so Eastern Washington University has land set aside to actually create the Lucy Covington Center. And I was working on that for nearly a year, but because my position was a soft position, I got notification in April that I would be laid off in June. And I wasn't too happy about that. I wanted to stay in that job, but because we were making great progress. And pretty soon there will be a website that will be shared from Eastern about all the great things that Lucy has done, along with a video series and documents of her work, her testimony before Congress. And so you'll see some new information about that, and I'll be happy to share that with the Wellness Institute. It's really important for our people to honor our tribal leaders and our elders. And, I can say with respect to the Biden campaign, I really recognize that Joe Biden, even though he's there in his 70s, he has always given consideration to our elders. And, he always references his grandfather and talks about him and how his grandfather has pretty much encouraged him to have faith and to, be close to the Creator. And I think a lot of that has really come out in this campaign. And, his focus has been to, to bring the soul back to America and to build better back. And that's sort of the strategy that we embraced during the campaign work. But moving on from just talking about myself professionally, I am been very much involved, since age 12 in fighting the termination of our tribe. We were recruited. My father was recruited from Bremerton, where he worked in the shipyards, to go back to work on the reservation to fight termination. So, we did that, and we had to see that our tribal council has 14 members. And at that time, there were 8 members of the council who were supporting the termination of the tribe. And it was crucial that we get at least a majority on the council to stop that effort. And that's what happened in 1970. And so, during that time, I learned a lot about campaigning, and we mostly had to lick the stamps and newspapers that were sent out to try to stop that effort. So we've learned early in our family how to campaign. And some of you know my brother, Andrew Joseph Jr. He's worked with the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. He was recently reelected to the council. This is going to be his 17th year. But Andy has really learned how to campaign well too, as well as my sisters and my other brothers. But anyway, so I've been an ardent member of the Democratic Party, going back to my days in college as a young Democrat, and being active and wanting to go to the Democratic Convention as early as 1980. And I tried really hard in 1984, but didn't get to go because I was playing basketball for our state championship team from the Colville tribe with the NIAA. But I just have been active, and I've worked in Washington, D.C. with the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs for both Senator Dan Evans, who's a Republican, and then for Dan Inouye, who is a Democrat from Hawaii. And I worked for the Senate Committee and worked on legislation like the drug bill, and I've worked on the Indian healthcare reauthorization. But my very first time of ever observing Joe Biden was at a hearing, a markup on a bill, a hearing and then a markup in the Judiciary Committee, and that was in 1987. And I was there essentially trying to figure out how to support the regional youth treatment centers in the 12 regions of the Indian Health Service, and trying to figure out how we could get more resources for not only treatment but for prevention. And when there's a big bill, when there's something big like the crime bill, it's really important to essentially, be there, figure out how you can insert amendments to support, the drug bill, so that we can get more money for the, eradication and for the prevention of substance abuse. And Joe Biden was very eloquent, and I was impressed. And so I met his key staff member, Ron Klain, who is one of the key staff had been one of the key staff in the Vice President's office in the White House, but has also more recently been working on the pandemic. And I also met a gentleman whose name is Goody Marshall. He was Thurgood Marshall's son, who worked for Senator Kennedy. And so through those two gentlemen, I was able to get language in to support and improve some of the resources and authorizations for the regional youth treatment centers. And, I'm very proud here in Spokane. My very first appropriations earmark working for Dan Evans was to write in a specific provision to allow for the 7 Nations Healing Lodge to be established in Spokane. And so that Healing Lodge is the first one in Indian country, and it still continues today. And they serve, kids who are under the age of 18. But it's I call it the flagship of the Indian Health Service. So anyway, learning early how to impact legislation was really my interest. But, it's very important to get to know who these members are and to follow their work. And so that was my first exposure to Senator Biden. And, he was always sincere and willing to try to see what he could do to help. So I was excited when he became the individual who was selected to run for president. I wasn't really certain if it was going to be Elizabeth Warren. There were a lot of people out there for Bernie Sanders. Pete Buttigieg was impressive. They all had something to offer, as did Kamala Harris. And, whenever there's a senator that's elected, I generally try to follow those individuals and what their career path is. And so I've always found her most impressive. Now, there were some people in Indian country, particularly in California, who were a little bit concerned about her. They felt as Attorney General that she was not favorable to Indian gaming. But I know, through the process of running for president, she'd had several meetings, participated with a number of tribal leaders in the first presidential sort of forum of Democratic candidates in Omaha. And at that time, O.J. Siemens and others, they really worked to sort of get clear what her position was about Indian gaming. And so she sort of relaxed that viewpoint, said she was doing that a lot at the request of the governor. It's hard to say sometimes between attorney generals and the governors, who really stands on that position. But she made it very clear to the tribal leaders who were present that she would be supportive of the Native American sovereignty agenda. And so she actually, of all of the Democratic candidates, had the best agenda. And that was sort of incorporated and integrated into Joe Biden's campaign. And I know there's two people, principally Charlie Galbraith and Raina Thiel. Charlie is Navajo and had worked in the Obama White House, as did Raina Thiel, who started at the Office of Management Budget. She made her way up into the White House, into the, community engagement section of the White House. But Raina is Alaska Native. She is from the, either Tlingit Haida nations, and I believe she's part of the Sea Alaska Corporation group. I'm not particularly certain about her village, but I found her to be, just really charming, very capable, very bright. And so between her and Charlie, they have been working, Joe Biden was smart. He decided to go to President Obama's staff in some cases to bring them in to set the policies for the Biden campaign. And so they worked on building up Kamala Harris's position and really worked to create a 15-page document, which is known as the Biden Plan for Tribal Nations. And that particular plan has been really important. And I'm not trying to look away from you, but I'm going to look here at my dual screen. He notes that Native Americans, with respect to the pandemic, have contracted the disease at 3.5 times the rate of white Americans. And in some states, they're dying at a rate of 5 times their population share. And we know that's really the case, particularly amongst the Navajo. And, so it's been exciting to see how the campaign kind of pulled together and how they developed. I'm going to take a drink of water a second, so thank you. And here, I'm very active in Washington State. I serve on the executive committee for the state Democratic Party. And during the state convention, which was the first weekend of June, there were a lot of people who were vying to become a delegate to the convention. And I had fortunately been elected for the 5th congressional district here in Washington State to serve as a Biden delegate. And this was my 3rd time serving as a delegate. I've been there for Hillary as well as for John Kerry in the past. And this was actually my 6th Democratic convention. I've been going a long time. You can probably tell why I have all this white hair. It's because there's a lot of hard decisions and a lot of things you have to do to get to where you're at in the Democratic Party. But what I can say is at that time, we were kind of uncertain whether Joe Biden was going to even have Native American staff. So, and I'll get back to the plan in a minute, but I just wanted to sort of clarify that we were not really certain. And I have been working since 1984 in working to double the numbers of Native American delegates. I've done that really as a promise to somebody I call my uncle, because he was there on relocation with my dad, and that's Joe Dela Cruz from the Quinault Nation. We started out going to a caucus with only 35 Native Americans in 1984, and that's built up to probably more than 225 in this year. But anyway, we were concerned, and we networked with all these other delegates like Brandon Stevens from the Oneida Nation and Christine Blackcloud from the Meskwaki, settlement in Tama, Iowa, and others down in Arizona. And we just sort of said, we have to have a staff member working for the Biden campaign. We need to have a director for tribal engagement. And we were putting pressure on the Biden campaign to appoint someone. So they did advertise the position almost immediately, and they filled that position with a Navajo gal. Her name is Clara Pratt, and Clara has formerly worked as, I think, chief of staff to Jonathan Nez, and has worked in the Small Business Development Administration at Commerce, helping to advance Native American enterprise. So anyway, so she was brought in to lead the tribal engagement efforts. And so from there, they ended up hiring staff organizers in Wisconsin, and they rolled in Theresa Sheldon from the Toledo tribe, who will join us here shortly. They had other individuals that were hired, Paui Rivera, who'd been working for the DNC for probably 4 to 5 years, very active at the state level in Colorado. So all these people sort of worked, on the campaign side with organizers to get out the vote, and their efforts were very, very powerful in this past year. But, I know many of them, sort of tying back to the plan, there were at least probably 45 individuals selected from across Indian country. John Echohawk is one that comes to mind, who served in the creation of this Biden-Harris plan for tribal nations. And it was just, they were meeting sort of throughout the summer, putting together and crafting this plan to deal with environmental issues. And essentially the plan, which is available, and I'll make certain to share the link with Jolene with the Wellness Institute, but essentially their efforts are to strengthen the nation-to-nationship relationship, to provide reliable, affordable, quality health care and address health disparities. Their intention is to restore tribal lands, address climate change, and safeguard natural and cultural resources. And they want to ensure that Native communities are safer, and that we tackle the crisis of violence against Native women, that we, they help support children and the elderly, from having to deal with those impacts of violence. And that they, there's only about 3 more little bullets here, so bear with me. They want to see that we invest in education and youth engagement, and that we meet obligations to and commemorate Native veterans, who they know serve in higher proportion than probably any other race. And they want to also, the Biden plan wants to ensure that Native Americans can exercise their right to vote. So all of that is very comprehensive, and it's like under each one of these bullets that I've outlined, there were, at least 1 to 2 pages of materials about their intentions and what their commitments are to upholding the United States trust responsibility to tribal nations and to strengthen the nation-to-nation relationship between the U.S. and Indian tribes. And so ultimately their intention is to empower tribal nations to govern their own communities. And, I think the plan is really well written, and I'm excited about it. But probably getting back to Native Wellness Institute, in terms of wellness and just, the overall health of our people, I think what's really important in this plan is that their intention, and this is, coming as a former executive director for the National Indian Health Board and working on the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, and working, all these years to have better access to resources. I've always wanted to see the Indian Health Service budget become a mandatory program, that it become an entitlement. And the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act in 2004 required that there be an entitlement study. And, so basically the programs like Medicaid and Medicare, those are entitlement programs. Some of the veterans funding is considered entitlement. But, we've never had entitlement funding available to Indian country. And what's really wonderful about this particular initiative is that there will be a chance for Indian Health Service to become a mandatory program. And it will have to be worked out carefully with Medicaid, but it's a chance to really see once and for all that Indian Health Service become that kind of program. So I'm just checking in on the time. My partner, Theresa Sheldon, my buddy with the DNC, will be joining us here in a few minutes. But, I just wanted to sort of mention what we've done to really address some of our concerns with the nation-to-nation planning efforts of the Biden campaign. So anyway, so when all of this was kind of coming together back in July, we felt it was also important to share information. And so myself and a gentleman, a Choctaw from Shoreline Community here in Washington, he's on this Washington State Central Committee. He and I both decided it was time to put out a Facebook site called Native Americans for Biden. And I knew a gal who's from Cattaraugus with the Iroquois Confederacy, who had formerly worked in the Clinton administration for the DNC when Carr was available. And so she's in Colorado, so I invited her to be a part of the effort. And then we were able to invite Deborah Proctor from Cherokee Nation, who was also a Biden delegate, to be a part of Native Americans for Biden. And we started July 1st and immediately, contacted all of our friends. And pretty soon we probably had a list of about 500 or 600 individuals who were our first invitees to that Facebook site. As of the election date, that number has increased to nearly 8,000. And it represents essentially, I think it's about 28 states. I need to double check that. But it also represents individuals from 38 countries. A lot of Indigenous people are interested in the election and are following the Native Americans for Biden site. And there are many, many from Canada as well. So besides our U.S. citizens, and we just started adding things. We were supposed to be considered an official Facebook site for the Biden campaign. That never really happened. It was a little disappointing, but it was okay though still, because they gave us access to all of the sort of videos and memes and information from the Biden campaign. And we weren't paid volunteers. We were just doing this by hook or crook at different times of the day and night. And I know I've probably spent sometimes up to 12 hours on Facebook, which probably isn't really healthy, but it's just one of those things that you have to do to keep the information flowing. And, when we were at a real critical point on election night, we knew our friends in Northeast Arizona were trying to get people to not leave the line in Arizona, because, when you stand in line for 3 or 4 hours, it gets pretty tiresome. And you just want to leave and go home or get something to eat or, sit down. And, probably not many of them had chairs when they first showed up at the polls. But, we were able to get people from some local businesses to offer up cell phone chargers to support them. They were getting water and treats to sort of support some of the people who were probably feeling hypoglycemic. But their message was to stay in line, stay the course, because at the polls, they won't close until everybody in line gets a chance to be a part of the effort. So, but that was really interesting. So we were doing what we could to help people to just stay in line and keep up the effort to vote. So anyway, the election outcomes were amazing. And I am just really thrilled that we were able to, the Native American vote made a significant difference in Arizona. I mean, and I know they're still counting. They haven't called Arizona yet. But when you look at the map of the reservations and compare that to the map of the voting and who voted for Biden, some of the Navajo people who were really impacted by the pandemic, they were voting and they were voting, not just for themselves. They were voting for the people, I've heard the people that they lost, they wanted to vote for them. That's why they really had strong organizers. They got everybody out. They did everything they could to get people registered to vote. And I kind of knew about maybe 1st of October that they had already registered 25,000 Native Americans in Arizona. 25,000 new voters, people who had never voted in their lives. And so, I had a lot of confidence that they were going to pull it off. And certainly they did. They delivered. And they had graphic artists and other people who helped the organizers to put together their campaign efforts. And, the Biden campaign also really did a great job of being there for them in Arizona. Joe Biden made a couple of trips out there, or he made one trip particularly that I know of. And Kamala Harris was there a couple of times, but they got on the bus. They took the Biden bus through the Navajo reservation, and it's a beautiful bus. It's the same bus that the people who were anti-Biden, the Trump people, were trying to run off the freeway in Texas. So, but they were able to still have an impact. And even though those rallies in Texas were not allowed, it was unfortunate because in the city of Houston alone, I know there's at least 200,000 Native Americans. It's actually probably one of the cities with the largest population. And I've known that because I've been down there doing an assessment on urban Indian health for the Indian Health Service, as well as to Austin and to San Antonio. So there's lots of natives in Texas, and we're just really going to do what we can in the future elections to engage them. But in Nevada, there's just been a tremendous showing. In Wisconsin, there were, I think there are 70,000 people according to the 2019 estimates in the census, and they were showing up in significant groupings, and so it was pretty exciting to see that happening. They made a difference in Wisconsin as well as in Michigan, and but I think some of you out there probably were aware that the CNN exit poll data that they were presenting, sort of highlighted the efforts racially, and you could see that, there was a certain percentage of white people that voted, that a certain percentage of Latino, which was about 13%, and that the Black American vote was about 12%. And then they had the category called something else, which was 6%, and Asians 3%. Now, we probably make about 2.5% of the nation's population, but in some communities, in some states, it's far greater. And I know I was particularly pleased with Montana because they had, in some of the Montana tribes, they had probably upwards of I think 87% in the Fort Peck tribe, and I think in Rocky Boy it was a significant amount. Let's see here, I'm looking at the data, and there were like Browning, Montana, where Theta's from, the Blackfeet tribe. They had 4,836 ballots that were sent, and they had 3,216 returned for 66.5% response. Fort Peck, they had 4,310 ballots that were sent, and they had 3,683 that responded, which is at 85.45% total. So, I told the story before, and I want to say when I went in 1988 to Montana with Senator Inouye, we went to Rocky Boy, Montana. And Rocky Boy, said they'd never had a member of Congress ever visit their reservation. They always felt like slighted that, nobody saw them as significant enough to visit. And so Senator Noe, when he met with all of the tribes, he told them there that you need to exercise your political power. You need to really change the period, the election date that you have, because he understood they were, I think, having elections in July. But his suggestion was that they needed to make certain that their election dates coincided with the federal and state election. So the tribes in Montana made a conscious decision to do that, and they followed Senator Noe's advice. And earlier this year, there was a report out of Indian Country Today, and it's indicated that the state representatives, the people who serve in elective office, in state house or the state senate, like Jonathan Winnieboy, they proportionally represent their population in the state government. And I know that they're utilizing that power that they have to make a significant difference. I've worked on oral health care, promoting dental therapists, and they were out there with money to make that happen. And they have really worked. One bill that's really impressive to me is they have pushed for state funding out of the state tax coffers to pay for native language programs in every state. They've made grants to their tribes for that purpose. That would be unheard of here in Washington State with our 29 tribes. But, when you have a collective voice and you have tribal members voting like this, with the thousands of votes that they can offer, they can make a difference. And so, we have worked in Washington State with a project called Organize and Rise and Rise and Run. And Organize Rise is really about trying to get people to get registered to vote. But Rise and Run is really about getting Native American and all other candidates to run for office, people of color to run for office. And we had such a great number of representatives, tribal members running for state representative, for state senate, for the Congress. And, now we have 6 members of Congress, although I know 3 of them are Republican and 3 of them are Democratic, but you essentially have Deb Haaland, you have Sharice Davids, and now you have Kai Kahale from Hawaii, who's the first Native Hawaiian, or he's actually the second Native Hawaiian to win a statewide office, because Senator Akaka was a former senator who's deceased now. But now they have another individual who will join sort of that Native American caucus on Capitol Hill. And my dear sweet cousin, Paulette Jordan, who's very powerful in her own right, former state representative, former tribal council, very excellent speaker, very motivational. She ran for the Senate, and she got, quite a bit of votes, and I'll have to double check and see what that amount was, but it's 32% of the vote. She was running against a gentleman who has like $15 million in his net worth. And so to run against a second millionaire, because she ran against another millionaire 4 years back, when she ran for governor. And so anyway, Paulette just has a lot of charisma. She's a part of the Democratic National Committee, and I expect to see great things from her. So, so getting to the idea of healing, what did this election mean? It really meant that people saw the opportunity to share their voice, to express their view, to exercise their vote, which, as Deb Haaland says, is sacred. And, I truly believe that it truly is, because, we have individuals, veterans in our families who, really were sort of criticized and put down by Donald Trump when he suggested that they were losers and suckers for enrolling and being a part of the military. And that just is not a very good message. I have a father who served in the Army. I have Brother Andy's been in the Army Airborne Rangers. My brother Monty's been in the Marine Corps. He served 4 years there. And my brother Michael was in the Navy. So we have like all branches of the of the Department of Defense, I swear, in my family. And then my sister Monica was also in the Army. So anyway, it's just I have a pretty interesting family. I thought about taking and getting enlisted myself, but I thought I'd do it through ROTC, and I took the course, and I just realized they've been recruiting for 200 years, and I didn't want to do that. So I still wished I might have stuck with it, but I have good friends who are in the reserves and the National Guard, and we just have so many veterans in across Indian country. So they've worked hard to protect our rights and the right to vote. So it's really important, I think, that we consider our votes as sacred. And the fact that we couldn't vote until recently either, in some cases, not since the 50s or the 60s were we allowed to vote. But, it's important to just exercise that right. So I'm going to take just a second here. Some people that know me probably think Yvette can talk a long time. I probably could. I could tell you a lot of different stories about my work in my days on Capitol Hill. I have an interest myself in working in the administration, and they've just posted over the weekend a transition page. It's called, it's like www.buildbackbetter.com. And again, that's www.buildbackbetter.com. And that website is for the transition. It's a place that you can sign up if you're interested in working for the administration. They'll be looking for different individuals with a lot of talent to go out and carry out the Biden plan for tribal nations and for the rest of the country. And I know I've tried to encourage my daughter to think about going to work for the administration. She had been slated to work for the Clinton administration. She'd already been vetted when the elections had occurred, but unfortunately, Hillary didn't win. And so she didn't end up going to Washington, D.C. So I'm hopeful that she will think about making application. I have an interest as well, and I'm preparing and getting my resume together to share with my colleagues to see that I get consideration for the position that I'm seeking, because I'd like to go back and sort of work to make a difference in Washington. So I think it looks like Theresa, is she joining us yet? Jolene?
She hasn't joined yet. I'll message her right now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. She's really the rock star that we need to sort of pat on the back for all of her work. My work only started, I've been active in the party all year and working to try to get representation and fulfill the affirmative action agenda for the state Democratic Party. And so that work's gone more. We started that effort last year in May. And so our plan was to make certain that we had all of the people that we needed for the African American community, for the Hispanic community, for the Asian Pacific Islanders, for folks who were disabled, for young Democrats. And when I say young Democrats, I'm talking about kids that are like 17 to, essentially 24, and then 25 to 30. And we were able to get all of those positions filled here in Washington State. We're really trying hard to have strong representation as well from the LGBTQ community, and we met that quota. We met and exceeded a lot of quotas. Usually in Washington State, they will, the census only allows for 5 delegates, but here in Washington State, we had 11 who were Native American, and 2 of those individuals are electors. That includes Patsy Martin from the Yakama Nation and our good friend and chair of the Native American Caucus, Julie Johnson. So it's really exciting to have those leaders who will be sitting down in Olympia in December, casting the vote in support of Joe Biden. So I seen Theresa. Are you there, Theresa?
Hi, Yvette.
Theresa.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm just really excited. I didn't get to tell any of the stories about the Eagles and how they kept appearing at all of the Biden events, but I think if you could share a couple of those, it's just, I mean, it's kind of sad, but it happened. One of Donald Trump's events, I think in North Carolina, the flag fell, which was sort of like, we thought symbolic, but at the same time, these Eagles were showing up. So you tell the story, Theresa.
Well, Hawk Dotted to Theresa Sheldon Seedsta, 12 Chadu Flaylup. Thank you for having me join you, Yvette. And I'm trying to remember. I don't actually remember that story, and probably because I am only trying to think of the positives. But I do remember the Eagles flying over Biden when he was out there. Was it in North Carolina? And of course, now my dog hears me talking and is barking in the background, so totally appropriate.
Oh, you can hear him now. He's froze up a little. I gave them background on the Tribal Nations Plan and talked a little bit about the process and the key staff. But I talked a little bit about the data too, but you can talk about highlights if you want of your efforts.
Well, I really just want to give a shout out. I mean, there were so many amazing tribal organizers of this campaign. Claire Pratt, who is the lead. You had Rachel Hood in Arizona, Arvina in Minnesota, or in Wisconsin. And of course, I should read these off because you had Pawi. There was over Crystal in North Carolina. There was over 11 Native Americans hired in the Biden-Harris campaign, which is the most Native Americans they've had in a campaign. Normally, it's like your name, tribal engagement director, and that's it. Washington State had Larry Cordier, who was the tribal organizer for the tribes. And so just the amount of national organizing that took place for Native Vote was phenomenal. And you see when you invest in communities of people of color, we show up and we vote and we partake in the process. It's not a surprise that voter suppression was at an all-time high in Republican states. And we really have to acknowledge voter suppression is the shenanigans and the sleaziness to make voting hard. And I'm so thankful for Washington State, Oregon State, that's actually said, hey, everyone should be registered to vote. If you don't want to vote, opt out. Otherwise, you should be included. And we're going to make mail-in voting easy, accessible, and there for everyone. And you've really seen that difference because we are in a worldwide health pandemic. The pandemic is not political. It doesn't just impact Republicans or Democrats. It actually impacts every single one of us. And at this point, so many of us, our lives have forever changed because of this pandemic. And it's sad that depending where you get your news source is how you've been behaving and thinking you're safe or not safe, or you're taking precautions or not taking precautions to getting sick, and the potential what that could be on your life. And so just there's so many emotions and so many plethoras of everything in my head right now that it's hard to stay focused and actually speak to one thing because it's exciting. It's like the first time breathing in 4 years, the exhaling of we did it. Oh my goodness, thank you. But it's also the realization that 70 million people were okay voting for racism. like that racism wasn't a deal breaker for them, that voting against women's rights wasn't a deal breaker for them. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to happen going forward. And I think the work going forward needs to be honest, it needs to be truthful, and needs to be caring. And so when you're in a time where you fear going to the river, or you fear going out to your usual and accustomed areas for gathering because of the intense racism and hatred people are caring for Native Americans, it's a real issue. And so once you leave the big cities, and then that negative rhetoric, the people with their big trucks and their big flags are just so blatantly in your face, it's just going to go underground again. It doesn't mean it goes away. So we really have to deal with the amount of systemic racism throughout every aspect of our governmental structures, our educational structures, our healthcare structures, and more. And so I think that's really where a lot of the work is going to have to take place. And how do we address those, and how do we, make change in a way that white nationalism, neo-Nazis, KKK, white supremacists, Proud Boys are actually arrested for the behaviors and hate crimes that they do. And so I look forward to like some of those things being addressed, of like, it's not okay. Like, you don't get to behave this way and think it is okay, because it's not. And nobody should allow that behavior at all. So I went totally around a couple circles.
Well, I would say, Theresa, I mean, you did a lot of work in advance to get this moving forward, and you worked really, internally within the campaign with the DNC. There was a point where it was important to get all of the tribes to endorse Joe Biden, and we were really working hard in every state with our organizers to make that happen. So there was a rollout, and there were these signs that were created, and I hope that they're not backwards for you. But, essentially there were placards that were created. They weren't like the usual big plastic signs that we have in our yards. But I know that they had probably several thousands of these created for the different campaigns. And, they were making their way into Arizona, because we saw the parade of people headed to the polls. It was really exciting to me to see the cars in line and honking and headed to drop their ballot in Window Rock, Arizona. And I think amongst I don't know if it was the White Mountain Apache or the San Carlos Apache, but there were crown dancers that were dancing, and you could see the crown dancers, and they're very dramatic, and they had all their movements, and they're moving their head and dancing and singing to the music with their drums. And immediately following the drums were these little kids that were carrying these signs.
Yeah.
It was so cool to see
those
pictures.
So powerful. So powerful.
Yeah, it was really neat. I know the Salish Kootenai, to boost their vote to get more people to the polls, they were serving fried bread. They had Indian tacos that they were making available to all of the people who voted on their reservation. And I don't know how many places that is, but it was just exciting to see. So,
the creativity, the creativity was just vast and far, because it depended, on cases and things like what you could or couldn't do in your community. But you've seen all in Navajo Nation, they had the horse riders, and they literally delivered ballots on horseback, and it was like Lummi Nation. They had a big car parade too of celebration, and they went around, and Lummi Nation actually moved their tribal elections to the federal elections. And so they're the same time to get the best turnout. And they created, and that's what I love too, is they created these amazing Native Vote shirts. of Coast Salish woman, and I claim her as my ancestor. And so just the outreach that tribes were able to create, the momentum of Native voters and talking to their young people. You seen the CNN, I always say it wrong, the Center for Native American Youth, CNAY, at the Aspen Institute, and you've seen that also with the young Mary Kim Titla's organization with the young folks. Oh goodness, Unity. Thank you. UNITY, really getting the youth to talk about what's important to the youth. And so it's easy for us to say, oh, the youth need this or the youth need that. But it was really about passing the microphone to the young people and saying, what do you want to see? How does campaigning look like to you? What is your concerns for people your age? And what does that look like into a big campaign? And how do we do that? And so I really hope those conversations continue. And our young people continue to stay engaged, because once you win the elections, one thing, now all the work starts. Now the work of being able to address the EPA changing over 100 regulations on the environment. You know, things like stopping the XL pipeline, stopping the Trans Mountain pipeline from bringing tar sands into the Puget Sound waterways. There's all of these offshore drilling. There's so many things that were changed in the EPA to allow more polluting, destruction, and desecration to our lands and waterways and our air that have to be fixed and regulated. And so I look forward to whoever those brave souls are that take on these positions and do a lot of repair work for the damage that was created.
Oh, I know that's really important. I communicated quite a bit with Mike Williams, who's been the chair for the Alaska Native Village Corporation, or the Alaska Native Village Councils, you know, that are they're more of the non-profit, well, they're for profit, but they're sort of like the opposite side of the corporations and from AFN, but they had, you know, they've been working really hard on their campaigning. They were supporting Senator Al, or the gentleman who's running, Dr. Al Gross, for Senate, and were unsuccessful. But the Alaska Natives, they've put money into their own websites. They're really working to try to get out the vote as well. And they have enough people in Alaska to make a difference. So I would really hope that they continue that effort. I know, Theresa, you work closely with NCAI, with the National Congress of American Indians, and their native vote people, they gave out grants, and some of them were coming out late, but there were grant monies that were made available. I know Becky Adamson, she had like $70,000 she wanted to direct to pay for buses to get people out to, you know, to vote if they needed help with that. And we directed her to the right place to make that happen. But, you know, the tribes are really invested in this concept, and I think thinking about getting their candidates to run for office. And so, you know, we just really need to inspire our tribal members to do that, because it will bring meaningful change and it will make a difference. So I'm just really excited about that.
And you see that too, you know, with Congresswoman Deb Haaland and Congresswoman Sharice Davids winning their elections, their re-elections in second term now as Congresswoman. And now we have a Congressman, Kai from Hawaii, who's actually Hawaiian, the only second Hawaiian to serve in the Hawaiian leadership, which is crazy. And so, but what you're seeing also is in Arizona, 13 Native Americans won local offices in Arizona. And so in Montana, you had Native Americans winning in Montana, 5 Native Americans winning in South Dakota for the state legislature. And so even though we have, you know, what we call red states, you're still seeing Natives making progress and winning. And a lot of times, that progress is happening. You know, Kansas has what, two or three Native Americans that won their offices serving in Kansas. So it's happening. It's here. And however we can be supporting our Native people running for office, like we have to do. And so when you see Raquel Montoya Lewis, Washington State Supreme Court Justice, she won. She's the first elected Native American woman to the Washington State Supreme Court. She's also my professor.
We sort of lost your voice there, Theresa. Sorry, Theresa, we lost your voice.
I know. Story of my life. But you're seeing so many amazing people step into leadership, and I'm so thankful, and I can't wait to see the next people who continue to grow and continue to take. I'm really excited because, you know, if Amy Klobuchar goes to the administration, that's a Senate seat, and Peggy Flanagan right there in Minnesota could be the next senator. You know, so it's the possibilities are endless for our people to step into leadership positions that rightfully have earned and should be there. So it's a great time in history right now, and I love it. I just love seeing the people putting themselves forward in these different roles.
Well, earlier I had explained, Theresa, that back in 1984, we got together in Atlanta, Georgia, and Frank Lemire was there, and he was a delegate up there supporting staff, and there were 35 delegates, but Joe Delacruz was there from Quinault Nation, and his whole message was kind of like the AA movement, where you say at the end of the meetings, you know, keep coming back. He was saying, keep coming back, but he says, I want you to double your numbers for the next convention. So, you know, 4 years later, there were 56. And then I was explaining that by this year, there were about 225. And then I used to work with a lot of Republicans as well at the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. So we would go to Dan Lewis, because he was sort of like the resident Republican, and say, because he was always a delegate too, because he worked for Senator McCain. But we'd say, okay, Dan, now it's time for you to double your numbers, because they only had 2. And then we wanted to see if they'd get more than 4. And I don't know how many are in the Republican Party. I shouldn't joke about it, but, you know, we need those folks to be active. And so, you know, we need all of people to have representation, whether it's for the Democrats or for, you know, the Republicans or, you know, the independents that are out there. It's just really important to recognize the power that Indian country has if they just exercise their right to vote. And I'll say one more thing. I was really pleased. I've always followed Dallas Goldtooth, because I really love the 1491 and all of the humor, all of their videos, which I just wish we could, you know, get some current version. But Dallas had said, and he's very involved with the Dakota Access Pipeline issue, that he was going to vote. He didn't care about the partisanship issues. He just said, I have to exercise my right to vote. We have to change the White House. And I really appreciated that he made that conscious decision to do that. You know, he's probably worked closely with Winona LaDuke. She endorsed Joe Biden. There's just a lot of really great people who decided it was time. And I have one cousin who's just adamant about not voting. She just feels she's disenfranchised. And I've been just really trying hard to convince her that, you know, it doesn't matter if you're unhappy with the tribal council. It doesn't matter if you're unhappy with the state government or the federal government. If you don't vote, you're not going to make a difference. And it's really important that we cannot be invisible. You know, we have to vote.
Well, and sometimes we think that our tribal leaders will handle it for us. And so we think we don't need to vote because our tribal leaders are doing it. So they're fine. And, you know, because we're just so used to them maintaining that government to government and doing those kinds of things. And so, you know, that's not how it works. And so sometimes we just forget that. But I'm so thankful for people like you, Yvette, Julie Johnson, who constantly brings people in, because a lot of us don't grow up with this. A lot of us don't grow up in politics or in a political family unless you have somebody in your family who ran for council or served on tribal council. And so a lot of us are learning right now and figuring out the process and not sure, am I a Democrat, am I a Republican? I know I'm Native and Native first, and so Native issues shouldn't be partisan. They should be nonpartisan, and they're based in, you know, in our treaty rights and legislation and federal rights. And so it's we have to continue to make the space open and available to anyone who wants to learn, because there isn't a easy way to get in. You know, sometimes you stumble upon a meeting, or sometimes you're told to show up by, you know, Auntie Julie or or Patsy Whitefoot, you know, and okay, my beautiful son, and then you just show up to something and you don't know what it is or why, and you get to learn, and then you're like, hey, I sort of like this, and that's how it starts, and you get hooked. And Matt Tomaskin did that for me, you know, way back in 2005, 2006 with Rebecca George and Jill Nampuya, and it was just like, you just never know what that moment is that's going to bring you to want to get more engaged. And so it's wonderful, the opportunities that are out there, though.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Theresa and Jillian, I think we're getting close to the little bit past 1 o'clock. So we've been on for an hour, and I really appreciate the Native Wellness Institute. I love all of your gathering of Native Americans, and I love all of the work that, you know, Theda and others like her promote across the country, as well as with other Indigenous people. So we're happy to come back to assist you, to help you understand more of what's happening with the new administration. But for now, we all just want to celebrate and breathe a sigh of relief and feel deeply that we can breathe. So we're going to do the happy dance here. So,
Yeah.
but thank you. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you.
Thank you, Yvette, for being amazing.
All right. Thank you, Theresa. And go hug that son of yours. He looks like he's a good alarm clock.